m'appelle Christopher Tan, je suis membre de la commission de programmation de la Fondation Pavillon Cycli. C'est avec grand plaisir que nous introduisons ce soir Madame Marina Tabassum. J'aimerais aussi noter qu'on a aussi la présence et le soutien du Prix Aga Khan Award qui sont ici aujourd'hui. Il y a Madame Nadia Simeon qui est avec nous ce soir, qui va nous dire quelques mots juste après. Alors, Marina Tabassum, qui est fondatrice du bureau Marina Tabassum Architects en 2015. Elle développe une architecture ancrée dans son contexte écologique, climatique, culturel et historique. Son concept Architecture of Relevance propose une approche engagée et adaptée aux réalités locales, faisant d'elle une référence pour le XXIe siècle. Son projet plus emblématique, le mosquée Bait Ur Rouf à Dhaka, a été récompensé par le Prix Aga Khan Architecture Award en 2016. Mais son travail a également été salué par de nombreuses distinctions prestigieuses, notamment le Médaille Soane au Royaume-Uni, le Médaille d'or de l'Académie d'Architecture en France et le Prix Arnold Brunner aux États-Unis. Parallèlement à sa pratique, Marina Tabassum joue un rôle clé dans l'enseignement de l'architecture. Elle a enseigné au Harvard Graduate School of Design, à l'Université de Toronto, et actuellement professeure à l'Université Technique de Delft, aux Pays-Bas. Ce soir, dans le cadre de notre cycle de conférences faire, Marina partagera avec nous son approche d'une architecture qui ne limite pas à la construction, mais qui donne du sens, qui répond à un lieu et qui, au fond, cherche à faire la différence. Marina, thank you so much again for being with us tonight. I know it's been a long journey, so we really appreciate it that you're here. We're looking very much forward to hearing everything that you will say and to see the great project that you're doing. So before I hand off to the word to Nadia, who will give us a few words of the Aga Khan Award. Merci et puis bonne conférence.
Bonsoir, merci beaucoup. Je voulais tout d'abord remercier la Fondation Pavillon Cycli d'organiser ces conférences qui sont toujours extrêmement intéressantes pour nous tous. Marina Tabassum a avec le prix d'architecture une longue relation qui va au-delà de simplement, on a commencé bien avant qu'elle soit lauréate en 2016. Elle a participé à de nombreux événements et elle a été pendant plusieurs cycles membre de notre comité de direction. Donc voilà, c'est une relation extrêmement proche. Écoutez, merci à vous tous d'être là et puis je vais laisser la parole à Marina. Thank you, Marina, for coming and for participating with us.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I will just start my presentation and then, okay. All right. So hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Cycli Foundation. It's amazing to be here. I know Geneva a little bit, not a lot, but I've been here so many times because of the Aga Khan Awards, being in the steering committee, and also, so it's nice to be back in a nice sunny day. So thank you for bringing me. My office, Marina Tabassum Architects, established in 2005, basically. So I will be showing maybe 4 projects today, sharing, and while I do so, I will talk a little bit about where I come from, what my country is all about. That's what I like to do because I think it's important to understand the context where I come from. So Bangladesh, that red dot you see, which is actually surrounded by India on 3 sides, and we have the Bay of Bengal in the south part. And that's the map. Let's say here you can see do you see my cursor? No, not really. Okay, so that's the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayan range. And from the Himalayan range comes out these major rivers, which are the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and the Meghna. And when it goes through, they converge and then flushes into the Bay of Bengal. Basically, that's the delta, which is right here. So that's Bangladesh. It's basically formed by the silt that was brought in from the Himalayas. So the glacial melt coming down with the monsoon rain. So all of that bringing in sedimentation. So 2/3 of Bangladesh is actually delta. And this is the Ganges Delta, the largest delta in the world. And we have 150 million people living in this delta. So we are a big population. And if you see this map here, this actually shows the entire river network. So it's an intricate, almost like veins and arteries in a body that you can see that we have more than 700 rivers and many more different forms of water bodies, wet, water retention ponds, and then we have lakes, canals, every kind of water that you can think of. So that's Bangladesh. It's more a waterscape than a landscape, actually. And if you see, this is basically a place where people are very connected to nature in many ways. Our material, being a delta, is generally earth. As you can see, people build with earth. A very common connection to natural beings. And then it's a very fertile ground also. So it's very green in a way. So that's what it is. And because we have so much of water bodies, it's also about living with water, fishing, and also all kinds of different things that can have in the water and activities. As I said, that we don't have any stone or anything as such. We have earth. So either you build with earth or you bake the earth and turn it into brick, and you build with brick. So that's our material. These are the only two materials that are actually from the land in that sense. So these are Buddhist monasteries from the 2nd century BCE. So, these are still like archaeological sites. These are like Buddhist Hindu temples, beautifully, intricately curved in terracotta, depicting the different mythologies or Hindu mythologies, and all done in earth. So earth can also do magic in a way. And we have really good brick masons, as you can see, that sort of became our way of construction in many ways. This here shows the rivers, actually, the movement of the rivers. This is a 20-year data of one of the rivers, as you can see. Within 20 years' time, the river moves so much. There are two things happening here. One, the land is eroding, and then you can see that there are sandbeds forming in the middle of the river. So it's a hydrological phenomena that is very unique, especially in the Ganges Delta. And that actually happens till now. And this is what happens when you see it from the ground. During the monsoon season, especially in the summer months, when the glacial melt is much more pronounced and we have monsoon rain with that, it actually washes away the land. And the land is fragile because it's sediment. And it's an enormous amount of water that comes through these rivers that goes into the Bay of Bengal. So the scale of the river, the amount of water that comes through it, and the fragility of the soil actually creates this phenomena which has displaced many people. So people get displaced from their location. They have to move away from their existing homesteads to different places. So that displacement is something which is ongoing as a process. And then with the global warming, as the glacial melt is much more pronounced nowadays, flooding has increased, the land movement has become much more pronounced. So that's one of the major crises that we have. At the same time, you've seen these sandbeds forming in the middle of the river. So this is one of those sandbeds. And this sandbed is probably 1 year old, so it's a baby sandbed. So when it's still a baby, it basically is just sand. And you can walk on it like in the beach, let's say. So this is something that we visited. We did a research from our office. And during that research, we were looking into this whole phenomena of this movement and geoformation and how these things happen, but at the same time, how it impacts people's lives. And so that's a 1 year old sandbed. In our language, we call them chor. So I'll call it chor. So when I say chor, you know it's sandbed. So basically, the first year, it's just sand. And then slowly, grass grows into it. So probably these grass seeds were brought in from somewhere while it was coming through these different rivers. So these are tall grass that grows. And then at the same time, you see all the different kind of fishes, like mud skipper fish and different kind of fish, and flora and fauna starts to come and settle down. By the fourth year, that's when it has become much more consolidated into a land, sort of a land where people can trade on it. That's when human starts to come in, and people starts to come and start putting their houses and boundaries and start to cultivate these lands. So from fourth year is human coming into these sandbeds, which in some ways, because you can tread on it, people think it's land, but it's not land. It's a hydrological phenomena where it can wash away anytime. So that happens, and it's constantly moving also. It moves because it's also changing its form. And after 8 years, let's say 8 years of its existence, that's when government comes in. Because by that time, it has already consolidated into a land, and that's when they start to, claim it as a land. And so fourth year to eighth year, those 4 years, these people who has lost their land and has become uprooted, displaced communities, really find a place to actually place themselves in these areas. And when we were doing our research, we saw that happening, that people come in, they come and start living into their spaces. I'll just drink a little bit of water and then I'll continue. Sorry. I'm fasting, so. All right, so let's continue. So in these areas where I was talking about the fact that there is this land movement, we have a vernacular housing system, which is actually wooden frame and then corrugated sheet or any kind of filler material, but mainly wooden framing structures. And when there is a movement in the water and people know that they have to move away, they take the houses down and then put it in a car or a cart or something, or a boat, and move it to a safe location. And this is a vernacular housing system that exists only around the belt of the rivers, which is quite unique. Otherwise, we have mainly mud houses if you go to any other places. But especially around the river area, this is what you see. And you can actually buy the houses. So if you go to a market, they have these modular houses which you can actually buy. So these are the houses. They're two-story houses, they're single-story houses, and they're quite beautiful, actually. And this has been there for more than 300 years. So we had, as I love to call it, that it's before even IKEA thought of a flat pack system, we actually had it in our landscapes. It's a vernacular system, so which is actually really nice. So we did this research on human, how people come to these lands, and then also the inheritance of these properties, which becomes sort of treated as land. And then there was also this factor of inheritance. I won't go into that detail because that would go back to the British colonial times, so I won't go there. The research that we did was showcased in Sharjah, in the Sharjah Triennial. And we bought actually 3 of these houses. I mean, we took them to Sharjah. They're still there. And so you can see the beauty of these houses, really intricately curved and almost has a sort of a Japanese feel to it, if you don't have those decorations on top. But it's really beautiful. But these houses actually cost around $4,000 to $6,000 US. And that's expensive for the landless communities who is moving and being displaced in different locations. So they cannot afford it. And for them, this is what they have. So in the sandbeds that I showed you, the chores, where the grass are growing, this would probably be a 2-year-old or 4-year-old, roughly. People just basically coming in, and they don't invest in their houses as much because they know they have to move away. These are not a permanent place for them to live, and they don't have land ownership, land rights. That's also another reason. So this is how they live. So once we did that research, that was in 2019, when we did the research and we published it as a document also. And then 2020, COVID struck. And when COVID struck, there was no work in the office, so we were pretty much, everything got stalled. We were, of course, everybody was thinking what went wrong, where did we go wrong, and, all the different things about climate crisis and the over-exploitation of the Earth's resources and not enough replenishment, that has brought us to a situation where Bangladesh is one of the countries that is actually is a victim in many ways, because all these places that you see are now under sea level rise. So we have sea level rise that's happening, and you can see the impact in the coastal areas of Bangladesh. The entire biodiversity is changing in many ways, and people have to move. So this displacement that I talk about, it's going to be a major phenomena in the 21st century as we are going about. So, and the people who are being impacted has the minimum carbon footprint in the world. So, and they are the ones who are actually facing it. So we have some responsibility as architects, that's what we feel. So during this COVID time, we thought that we could, since we have the time, let's sit together and create something that might help these people to have a more or less a dignified way of living, rather than just living in a very poor condition with children, because children are growing in those houses. So we came up with an idea of a space frame structure, which is here, you can see. And the space frame structure is made out of bamboo, basically, because we grow a lot of bamboo. We have 33 different varieties of bamboo in Bangladesh, and it grows everywhere because it's a tropical, subtropical climate. So it's something local. So using bamboo and some steel connectors that we created, and the thing is you can actually dismantle it and take it with you. And then we have created 2 levels so that people can have two floors in that sense, so that the ground level is somewhere where daily use, and then upper level is somewhere one can actually during the flooding season could take refuge, but at the same time it could also be a place to sleep at night. And the other things are basically roofing, which is corrugated sheet, because it's easy to dismantle and take away. Otherwise the facades could be anything. And basically, we made a calculation, and we saw that we could actually make that with $250, which is kind of affordable for the people. And we made some illustrations that how this whole thing can actually work. So basically, you have like a community you can create, and if there's flooding, people can still use the upper level where they can take refuge. So during COVID, I think this was in April, May, when we made a structure. We were still in the lockdown and non-lockdown situations, but 2 architects together actually created the first module of the building. And we saw that it actually worked because we tried and tested. There was no engineers involved, so we just made it ourselves. And so it worked, actually. So when it worked, and we saw that this could be a solution, we thought we should try it out in a actual site. So we took it to these chores where we were working with the people for the research. And that's basically somewhere there. And to go there, that's in the middle of the lower Meghna River, let's say. To go there, you have to take a boat like the middle one from Dhaka to mainland. And from the mainland, then you take another smaller boat to go in the middle of nowhere, where it's almost like this, that you can see. That is just sand in the middle of the river. And so we go there, and then we started working with the local community who was there. So these are basically farmers farming these sand beds. So these are actually sand beds, which are much older, let's say. And you see the river. The river is actually up there. That's the line of the river. So you don't even see it. I mean, that's the extent of its, the scale of it. So we built these houses using bamboo and the steel connectors. And basically, this is like a 2-module house. This is a single module house for a young family, and 2-module house for a bigger family. We also built toilets for them. So this was our first building process where we engaged with the local community, giving them an idea that this could be a possible solution for a house. Whether they accept it or not is something we didn't know. So it was just a sort of a research that we did. And so people accepted these in that area. So we built 5 houses. So after that, we were seeking grant so that we could make a better use and then maybe go to different location and try these houses out. And so we looked for grant, and then we got a Swiss grant, actually, from the Swiss Development Corporation. They gave us a grant. And we created a foundation, actually, called the Foundation for Architecture and Community Equity. So our office did the research, and the foundation was implementing the project. And we named these houses Khudibari. Khudi means small, and Bari is a house. So Khudibari is a house that we envision could be a sort of an intervention into the vernacular landscape. And this intervention could actually become local knowledge slowly. And if it becomes a local knowledge, people would be interested in building it. So that was our basic idea. So to do that, since we had a grant, we decided on certain locations in Bangladesh where we have flooding. We have these land movements. We have 52 rivers, 57 rivers that we share with India. And we, being a downstream country, we have dams on 52 of them. And so quite often, these dams, when they open it, we get flooded by the water. So that's a situation that happens quite often. And there's been negotiations with water sharing and all of that. But when the water comes, it becomes a flooding which can remain there for 2 weeks or so. So these are the locations which we chose to work with. And the way we did it was, we had a brochure. And then the idea was the community should decide whether they want to have a house or not. And they should decide who should have the house, because we don't have so many to build. I mean, in every location, we built about 15 to 20 houses. So we give them brochures. We work with them making maps. So we made maps of the villages where we worked. We have these models where we have these tiny Khudibari models where women, men, children all try it out to understand how this whole structural system actually works. It's a basic space frame structure. And so it's easy to build in many ways. So these are the different ways we actually work. And then we also do wealth ranking. And the wealth ranking actually helps to then find who would be the potential owner of a house, because we want to give it to people who actually deserve it. And so we have these workshops where we sit together, watch films of other locations where we have already built the houses. So bringing material is, again, one of the major issues because it's in the middle of the river. And so, of course, we have to bring in bamboo because there's no bamboo in the sand beds, but we can bring it from a close by location. We bring the steel connectors. But for the facades, everything is whatever they can find in that location. So people make it, actually. So the idea is to transfer the knowledge of making. So they make the houses, so they understand how the steel connectors are connected and everything. And so basically that's how it's done. And then once we've built the structure, the entire facade, whatever they wanted, they can cover it up and then they can make the house whatever they want. So the idea was not to be too far removed from the actual notion of a house, which actually is a part of a sort of a cultural identity of a house. And so, if it would be a different kind of a form, it would be difficult for people to accept. So the idea was to keep it as close as possible to the actual houses that people live in. And as I said that, the material could be anything. Here you see this is grass. So generally tall grass, you can bind them together and create a facade. People use everything that they have, salvaged corrugated sheet. It could even be jute sticks. Anything is a facade material. So, so the upper floor, as you can see, people sleep there. It's a nice place to also. It's quite breezy. It's quite nice also because there is no, it's middle of the river, so there's a lot of wind that comes through. So if you open the windows on both sides, it's not hot also. So during the summer months, it doesn't feel so hot. And so, everybody has different ways of living in it. So we've created these sort of communities, and these houses have gone through several years. We started building them since 2020 onwards, so now 5th year. So within this time, they have evolved in many ways. So you can see people have extended with a veranda, some have extended like a kitchen, things like that have slowly started to come in. I'll just share one site, which is Chor Shildoho, where we have built some of the houses. So this is what it looks like during the monsoon season. So there is water coming all the way, and you can see the villages where we have the houses built. And this is when we built it. And this is a scene now. So you can see how the entire village is slowly starting to grow around the houses. And they have these, banana plantation. They have different kind of small, houses for goats and cows and everything. So it's starting to take shape as a sort of a village. And it's also interesting to see this is during the dry season. So you see that you can see the sand, which is now again quite much longer. But if you see here, it's all during the monsoon season where the water is already covering it. So there's also this whole notion of water and no water. So that's one of the projects that's ongoing for us. We are at the moment we are also looking into how we can create a sort of an ecology where you can have bamboo plantations and the steel connectors to be built in the locality, and also livelihood programs. This is after we have the houses built, we have a nice little ceremony where everybody gets a certificate who has a kudibari. And this is also quite interesting. Within these years that has gone by, we've had thunderstorms and we have had flooding. And you can see this is a thunderstorm image where the local houses are all, sort of crumbled. And you see our kudibar is still standing. So that's also quite something for us to, because we never thought that it would really last in a thunderstorm, but it did. Probably because of its structural system, because it's a space frame structure. It has these, cross bracings that really helps it. So it can also survive. And it has survived several floods, actually. So when it floods, people actually go to the upper floor to live there. And then the lower floor, even if it's a grass-made facade, they can redo the facades also. So that's also done. So this is a project that's, as I said, ongoing. We are still working on it. This is our latest baby. You can go and see it in Vitra, in the Vitra campus. So it was built last year in June. So it's not yet 1 year, but if you are there near Basel, Weil am Rhein, please go and visit it. We tried to build it exactly the same way. It's an archival document that Vitra acquired from us as a design project. So we've had a lot of interesting also triptychs, like illustrations. One thing we do is livelihood programs. That's something we started with our foundation, that if you want to give people houses and we cannot give them, at some point they have to start making their own. And if you want to make a house, you have to have the proper economic situation. And for that, you need livelihood. And whatever they have in terms of income is just enough to go through their days. But if they have an extra income, that would help them create these houses. So that's why we work with women, and we have done several of these sort of livelihood programs in different areas in where we are located with houses. And this is a location close to the refugee camps. As you know, Bangladesh hosts about 1 million refugees, Rohingya refugees who are coming from Myanmar. So that's Myanmar. That's the Rakhine state. Rakhine state is this place where the Rohingyas are actually from. And because they were facing prosecution in different times of their life, the last was in 2017. And that's when a large exodus of refugees came to Bangladesh. And the orange place, which is Cox's Bazar, that's where they're actually being held or kept. As I don't know if you know, but recently the US aid has cut the funding, and because of that, the refugees' food subsidy has completely dropped to almost nothing. Now they'll get about $6 per person, which is creating a lot of tension in our location. But those are recent news. But this is how they live. It's one of the densest refugee camps, and the Rohingyas are basically stateless people because they don't have recognition from, let's say, Myanmar as their citizens, and of course Bangladesh has given them space to live, but they do not have the refugee status. They're called the forcefully displaced Myanmar nationals. And so this is the refugee camp map. So every little dot is a shelter. And so you can imagine the amount of people who are living there. So we had about 8 projects that we worked on with the World Food Program. And with that 8 projects, we had different things that we worked on. And when we got commissioned to do these projects, the first thing we did was it was right after our Kudibari project, so it's almost chronologically going on. So we decided we should make a house for ourselves first, right outside the refugee camp, because our work was more about engaging with the refugees to work with them together. So that's why our first work was to share the knowledge with the local Bangladeshi community so that we can make the houses. And then after that, when we have to work in the refugee camp, we'll be able to do so. So the first house we built is our house. And that's the one which is right outside the refugee camp. This area used to be a rainforest, let's say, that we had entire area was forest. So to make space for the refugees, trees were cut to actually create a settlement. And right outside the boundary of the refugee camp, it's an absolutely nice, dense forest. So we took permission from the forest department and we created this house. It's the same Kudibari structure, basically 3 modules connected together. And then we just used bamboo as our facade, and then the roof was basically thatch. So we have upper floor where we generally sleep at night. The lower floor is where we work during the day. And it was an idea that, if you're giving it to people, we should be able to live in it too. And it was amazing to live in it, actually. So and it's actually quite a difficult thing because right across within 5 minutes walk, you have refugees living in a situation where, ours is a by choice and theirs is by force in many ways. So that's a kind of a really sad story. But, when you go there, work there, it's kind of very intense working with, people who has so much trauma and needs so much of healing that for us, this house was sort of a refuge for us. So this is our team of architects, builders, community architects and engineers, carpenters, so all together. So the works that we did were several community centers that we built for women in the refugee camp, and we also did some reforestation work. But for the women's community centers, we actually sat with the women to create the program, and it was important for us to actually to work with them because we don't know what it feels like to live in a cramped room with 10 other members of your family and being a woman in that space. And then what memories that you carry with you of your home, the longing to go back home, or the prosecution, the people dying, all these things are the trauma that they live with. And then the hopelessness, this indefinite temporariness where they are being thrown into. So those are issues that are impossible for an architect even to imagine. So it was important for us to actually sit with them to understand their needs. And so very quickly, they immediately started making models. So they're amazing. They really are talented people. If you give them the idea how to do it, they made models. They told us exactly what room should go where. So it was almost a nice co-design process. And through which what came out was actually they wanted a garden. They just wanted a garden. And that garden was what we wanted to offer them also. So you can see the model and you see the beautiful drawing. That's their garden, their expression. And so we introduced the Kudibari structure also there. The reason are few. One, as I said, that they are called the forcefully displaced Myanmar nationals. So they are temporary. And so they are not allowed to have anything permanent. So the rules of construction inside the camps are quite rigid. The only material that's allowed in the camps are bamboo. So you can only build with bamboo. And the foundation has to be very minimal. It cannot be more than 2 feet. Sorry, 60? Okay, 60 centimeters. Okay, so that's the maximum you can go. And then we decided that we can do 3 structures and then create stairs in the middle so that we can use 2 floors. That would give us enough space to have that garden in the middle. So we were able to offer them that garden that they really like and love. And the buildings are basically, the Kudibari structures. So from the camps, that's what you can see. That's the inside of one of the rooms. So women basically come to these spaces at times only to sleep for 2 hours because that's what they're most needed. And in a way, it's sort of a healing process also. So they call it the house of peace, in a way, Shanti Khana, that's what they call these houses. So which is actually nice. So we built about 2 of these inside the camp and outside the camp also for Bangladeshi community, because the Bangladeshi are also suffering because their livelihood is also being severely disrupted because of the presence of 1 million people in their land. So I'm not going to show you that. I'll probably show you a few other projects which are more about our city. So Dhaka, where I'm based, it's one of the fastest growing cities in the world. We have 20 million people living in that city. And we were talking about traffic problem in Geneva. Come to Dhaka. I'll show you what traffic is. So basically, that's a city. And within this place is one of the densest cities in the world, in a way. We don't have the luxury of having single family houses. So we basically stack ourselves up one above the other. And so this is the scenario that you see. And we also have this scenario that's quite common in many of these Asian cities where we have the low income and the high and middle income living side by side. One is the formal, the other is the informal. But, I don't know why they have been called informal because they are absolutely needed in a city. But there's no thought or no, in a way, no response from the government or from the developers to give them a decent way of living. So that's, again, one of the issues. We have our parliament building that we're very proud of. And this is how we live, actually, stacks of floors. So I generally do not build a lot of building in the city because it's a domain of the developers. And well, the developers are doing really beautiful buildings these days. But even then, I have built 1 or 2 of them, but not really much. My interest is more into the communities and more about different kind of projects. I'm not so interested in building stacks of floors somehow. So that's my personal choice, let's say. So this is one of the buildings where you can see these stacks of floors, and the only thing you can do is create this breathability of the facades. And so that's basically a core, and then you have 2 apartments on 2 sides. And then the idea was to use our local material, which is brick, and to create a situation where in our tropical climate, when we have these hot summer months, we need ventilation. So the breathability of a building or how a building breathes is very important for us. So that's the building on one of the major spines of the city. And as I was mentioning, that we are in the subtropical climate where Bangladesh, as you can see, the Tropic of Cancer is cutting through Bangladesh, which makes it a subtropical climate, which means we have about 6 months of dry season and 6 months of very wet season. So between these two, we are oscillating. And the temperatures are moderate in a way. I would have said moderate maybe 10 years ago. Now the temperatures are rising for sure. So we definitely need much more climate control, especially in the summer months, but not in our so-called winter, where temperature goes down to maybe 10 degrees or so. So it's generally a nice, moderate climate. And then all you need is to have a roof on your head and bring yourself above the water level. So create a higher plinth so that you're raised above the water levels. And that's it. That's architecture. You don't need insulation. You don't need nothing. So doing architecture in Bangladesh is much easier than doing it probably in Geneva. So you should all come. So that's one of our first modern buildings built in the 1952 by Mazhar al-Islam, our first architect in Bangladesh. And that actually set, in many ways, the tone of what architecture should be. It's much more about openness, about creating a connection between in and out. So you can see that in many of our projects, we've been also working in this idea of how you can open it up and close, and also creating these courtyards, which actually helps to breathe the building. So how you really bring in airflow into the building is something that one has to work on. I'll show you two more projects because I'm running out of time. I'll show you the mosque for which we got the Aga Khan Award since we are here in Geneva. So, and then another small mosque that we have built. So the blue dot that you see, that's actually the end of the city of Dhaka. And that's where our mosque project is situated. And it used to be a farmland, and that's my grandmother who actually commissioned me for this project. So it was her project. She owned a land in that area in the northern part of Dhaka, which used to be an agrarian landscape, as you can see here. Um, and and then she decided to give that land, donate that land to build a mosque because there was no mosque in that area, and it was still a village. So for the villagers, she wanted to donate that. And this is in 2006 in September when we had the groundbreaking ceremony and the declaration that this land will become a mosque. And you can see my grandmother in a white sari sitting next to the haystack. And that this is September 2006, and she passed away the same year in December. So in a way, I made a promise to my grandmother that I would be, make or design this building for her. So it became my project in a way. I had to raise fund, I had to design, and I had to do everything. So I became the builder, the designer, the almost to some extent the client, and also fundraiser. But what I started with was to understand what is a mosque. And in our context, especially in the subcontinent, in the Indian subcontinent, women do not go to mosques to pray. It's only men goes to mosque to pray. Women generally stay at home and they do their prayer at home. And only very recently in larger mosques, they have started to giving space for women, but not in a very dignified way. It's just a small room maybe next to it, and not in the main prayer hall. So, those are issues. So I have no memory of being in a mosque. So for me, it was, in a way, I would say, it freed me from all the preconception of what a mosque should be. And it gave me a chance to actually look into this whole idea of what is a mosque. And so I looked into it from the historic point of view, from when the first mosque was built and by the Prophet. And basically, it was a house form that was elongated and made larger into a space which was about congregation. And so the only thing is you just need a roof over your head and know the direction which way you need to pray. And basically, that's all you need. And you need a leader who would be leading the prayer. Basically, that's all a mosque requires. It doesn't have any kind of sort of symbolic identity to a mosque. That actually slowly started happening throughout history. And then we see domes and minarets and all these things. But the only idea about mosque was that it was a space for congregation, and during that time, it was used as a space where people would gather to learn about the religion. It was also about a place where community used to gather, and all kinds of activities used to take place, not just prayer. And as Islam moved from the Arabian Peninsula to all different directions, and we have seen so many different forms of mosques in different places, and so actually it can take any form and shape. There is nothing, absolutely predominantly prescriptive of a mosque in that sense. So in our location, let's say in Bengal, when mosques were first introduced in the 13th century, when Islam came into Bengal, these are the first mosques that you see, actually, the Sultanate period mosques. And it was actually taken from the whole idea of temple building concept. So how the temples were built, it was the same idea of a temple building, but the design was different. It was much more, there was no mythology anymore. It was much more about geometric patterns. But the construction system was quite similar. In some cases, domes were also introduced. But for me, the idea was, do you really go towards symbolism, or should it be about the act of praying and, about the space that you create? So I looked into the spaces which I find very spiritual in a way, the mosque in Cordoba, the Hagia Sophia, and these are spaces which are really, inspiring in many ways. And the light and the beauty of light and the way it really creates that aspect of spirituality was something that I thought would be my inspiration. And so this is the site, which used to be, as I said, an agrarian landscape, is now becoming slowly a city which is really not planned, so unplanned city in many ways. And so that's the site. And then the site that I was given was 75 feet by 75 feet. Somebody do the calculation. But the prayer hall had to be shifted towards the direction of Mecca, and to do that, I had to shift the whole prayer hall at a 13-degree angle. And so that created a very difficult corner. So I introduced this circular drum that actually facilitated that shift, and also introduced these corners, or let's say not really corners, but these spaces which were now open to sky that would help us to breathe the building, as I was mentioning, that you need to breathe building in that our location. So these are some of the first sketches. The idea was also to create a connection to the old architecture and to the new, from the Sultanate period to our, let's say, modern day mosque. So that was actually my first sort of conceptual drawing, where decided that the prayer hall in the middle, and then it would be wrapped around by all the other functions. So the prayer hall, as you see here, and it's basically wrapped with brick. And the reason for it was also quite important. That is, I didn't have enough fund to build the mosque. So the idea was that to limit the use of concrete, because concrete is expensive in our location. So we decided to limit the use of concrete only to the prayer hall, to make it a column-free space. And brick is cheap, brick labor is cheap, so we thought that let's just wrap it with brick. So there's no concrete in the wrapping, it's only load-bearing brick structure. So that's the plan, the ground floor plan, the top floor plan, and the elevations and sections. And the idea of perforation, because you need to breathe your building, so the perforated skin actually helps to breathe it. So that's also, again, was important. So this is what the mosque looks like now in these days. Yeah, this is, yeah, so people basically use these little spaces. At one point in time, the entire area is going to be filled up with buildings. And so when it does, you won't have, there will not be any chance to see the facade actually. So for me, the facade really didn't make much of a, was not the priority. It was always about how you can bring in light and make people look within rather than looking without. So yeah, so these spaces are quite vibrant. You can see people, children playing. People basically use it like a small plaza, and local brick. And yeah, so the space, so once you, from these courtyards or the spaces, you enter into that prayer hall. And that's also interesting that, you let the water come through the building. And of course, it doesn't wet the prayer space, for sure not. It's just, but it lets the nature and the building becomes one in many ways. So the light, I would say, is the only embellishment of this building, because we didn't have much fun, as I said. So it's a very elemental, basic building, but that's only element of let's say, ornament, I would say, is light. And the light has a nice way of playing through the building, which makes it also quite unique in different season, different years, of different time of the year. So yeah, so that's the mosque. People praying. And after the Aga Khan Award winning, we had a nice lunch inside the mosque. We invited the local community who actually, came to that space. And the space is actually not just used only as a prayer space, but we have weddings and other things that's happening in that building also. So there are ways that this is being used. The other mosque that I will show you, and then I'll end basically today. So this is a small mosque, but it's in a village, in a much more in the southern part of Bangladesh. And it was actually an old house, which is a 300-year-old house that you can see in the middle with a boundary around it. Belongs to a family who, the building was dilapidated, and then they invited one of our architects, who is a restoration architect, who restored that building. And after the restoration was done, they wanted to build a mosque, because there was already a mosque from 300 years ago, but it was never really built properly. It was just a corrugated sheet or something kind of a mosque, not really. And then it was never designed in that sense. So they invited me to come and design it for them, so which I did. So this is the old house, 300-year-old house. That's what it looks like inside, and you can see it's all brick structure. So the master plan, if you see, that's the house with the boundary, and the mosque is right outside the house. And then we have a water body here, which is a pond, and people can, basically do their ablution in that space and then go to do their prayers. Again, it's a very, let's say, load-bearing brick structure. There is no concrete in this building at all. It's entirely brick. And so and this is much more open, because in a village situation where you don't have houses all around you, it's much more landscape. It's much nicer to let the air come through and then go out, and then you can actually see through these openings a little bit of greenery. So that's why we decided to make it more as a pavilion. And this is the area which is actually facing the Mecca direction. That's where the Imam actually stands. And so basically that's it. From the inside, you can see the outside of the mosque. Keeping that same tradition of these old mosques that we had. So this is the entrance plaza, and you can enter through here. And this is this construction system. As I was saying, that is an entirely load-bearing structure. So after a certain height, we have a tie beam, and then the brickwork starts to rise. And then you have a roof, basically just holding, they're held by the brick walls on the sides. And so bring in a little bit of light from all sides so that it creates that ambience of light in a way. And so basically that. I'll probably finish it here. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much again, Marina. That was truly, truly inspiring. It was really a beautiful presentation. Really amazing to see all the work that you're doing. I have to mention. It's funny because just before the conference, I was mentioning to Marina how we're doing the dries here, and so
the river.
You mentioned it right after, and as you can clearly see, we have clearly different problems. We're creating rivers, and you're dealing with them. So, but that's what's really amazing is about your ability to take the context and to kind of be so adaptive and to reinvent or to rethink everything from the ground up. And so it's really nice. We're going to move on to the questions. So maybe from the audience, if anybody has questions, il y a des questions de l'audience. Vous êtes libre? Il y a quelqu'un qui veut commencer? Il y a des micros qui passent.
I have a question about the bamboo structures in the floodlands. In your experience with the ebbs and flows of water, how does the bamboo react to wet and dry? Wet and dry. Does it split? Does it need replacement so many times? I mean, it grows, so it's easily accessible, but what's the life cycle of these homes?
Yeah, well, the bamboo that we use for the structural system, they are called in our language we call it borak bamboo, but it's a very thick wall. It has a very thick wall. It's structural bamboo. If you have a thin wall of the bamboo, then it has a much more possibility of cracking, which happens a lot. and those bamboo which has a thin wall, we use it more for the facades. But for the structural system, we have a certain bamboo that we use, which has almost like a, what would I say, maybe half an inch. Half an inch is what? 2?
Half is about 1.2.
1.2 centimeters of wall thickness, which is quite a lot actually. So they don't really crack in that sense, and we've been using it for some time. And then once the problem is when the bamboo gets exposed to its end, that's where it's vulnerable. On the sides, it's not. So if you seal it properly with when we put it inside the steel connectors and then we seal it, once you seal that, then it doesn't really get affected. So far, we haven't seen any kind of changes with the ones that we have already built, and we're hoping that it will at least last, maybe 5-10 years minimum. But you can always replace it. That's a possibility for sure.
Yeah, just like to follow with the bamboo houses, how it's founded in the ground.
Yeah, well, when you are in the sand beds, it's basically sand. So what we do is we take either bamboo or we have some tree trunks, we just pile them into the ground so that it becomes much more solidified. And then maybe not much actually, around 2 feet. And then once you create sort of a piling, and then you tie that whole structure to that pile, basically. And then you have the mud plinth. So it's being covered by the mud plinth.
But the pile is made of what?
Bamboo.
Oh, okay.
It could be bamboo, or there are also some tree trunks that are much more thinner. The betel nut tree, it's almost like a palm tree. You can also use that. Yeah, so whatever is available locally. We don't bring in materials from all different directions. It's always about sourcing closely so that we can reduce the cost.
So thank you very much for your presentation. That was really interesting, and it's really interesting for us to see this other aspect of architecture practice. It's really inspiring, as Christophe was saying, to see how we can see here an architect that is working in the field. I mean, he's not in his comfortable office with air conditioning and working with his computer. There you seem to be really, knowing all the techniques of building and being in touch with all the materials and really engaging with building stuff and producing. And my question has to do with the design process. How do you get to these shapes? There's a very strong presence of geometry, I see, in your process, but how do you come to design these shapes? How do you make your projects evolve? How can you say a word about the design process? What's behind this?
How do you come to a process? I don't know. One thing I would first just tell you about this whole idea about architects going and building there. These sandbeds do not have any road network, no electricity, no running water, nothing. So the architects, when they go there, they basically camp. And then when we bring in architects to work, they have to be able to cook, they have to be able to build with hands. So they have to be hands-on in many ways. So those are the criteria we're looking for in architects these days. So I think if you're anybody's teaching in schools, I think you need to promote those things, that they should be able to have the survival mechanisms, which are very important, because architects are becoming people in the front line in many ways. So that's important. In terms of design, I don't know really. I mean, it's difficult to say. The way my process is, in my office, especially when you see a mosque or these kind of buildings, that's much more. I would say, we do a lot of research in the beginning of a project. We try to look into all different things, typological research, also historic buildings, and all these things. So try to gather as much ingredient as you can, And then before you start cooking, right? It's almost like before you start cooking, you bring in all the ingredients, and then from there, I would say that from the research, from the site visits, from the contacts with people, and also from the clients, then slowly things start to work. And I would say the first sketches are done by me myself. So I do my drawings. I also do my AutoCAD drawings, by the way, myself. I do the SketchUp files and everything. And then, of course, we have back and forth with office architects. So we are, they also comment on maybe this is better, maybe this is not. So we do have conversations, but generally the first ideas do come from my head. So I don't know where it comes from.
Hi. Well, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for being an inspiring woman and architect. And it's amazing to see the work being with in mind sustainability as social aspect and ecological. And I was wondering, you always spoke about the work as a we. And I was wondering actually if you could share a little bit more, since you just tapped upon the topic, about the team and about also the process of sustainability as a social sustainability within the community and the bureaucracy of the local communities and politics, basically.
Well, I say we because architecture is never one person's work, right? It is a collective work always. The first idea might come from somebody, but then it needs an entire village to be able to build it. So everybody has certain ideas, and that's why I find Aga Khan Award quite an interesting award, because they recognize everybody who's involved in the project, and so that's really nice. So we have certificates for everybody, from the architect to the brick mason. Everybody gets a certificate, gets a recognition, which is really nice in a way. And so that's the reason why I like to say we, because it's a communal work, in many ways collaborative. Yeah, in terms of politics, of course there is, especially when we go to build these Khudibari projects. It's not that simple, because we work directly with villagers, with the community. We don't go through, let's say, the political leaders or political people, because even our ex-prime minister, she had a project which was about creating housing for displaced communities. And we also proposed our project to her, but it never got, because our project is too let's say less costly, and theirs are much higher cost, and how the cost increases. So they never accepted our proposal, because we said that we want to work directly with the communities. Our houses now costs about $450 each houses, with labor and also transportation cost. But we try to work with the local government. The local government, we try to include them in the process, because the houses that you saw, we assembled in the mainland, because that's where we have electricity. And so we assembled first. We make the buildings there, and that's why we need a local government partnership, because they have larger areas where we can use and make the houses. We can use their electricity, find a place to stay also for the architects, and then they dismantle it. Then they take it to the chores, let's say. That's when they build it. So it's important for us to also include the local government in the process, because then you have a much more stronger ground, and people trust you much more, in a way, when you work with them. And the other thing is, when you just cannot go and start building. Even this process takes about 6 months. In the first house to build, at least takes about 6 months, because this engagement with people, to trying to convince them, to bring them into your trust, is a long process. Actually, it's a tiny house, and it can be built within 2 days or 3 days time, with very minimal people. But in the process, because we just don't want to go and build something and forget about it, we want this to be a sustainable process. That's why it takes much more longer time. So yeah, those are the issues I can talk about.
Est-ce qu'il y a encore une autre question, peut-être?
Thank you for the presentation. It's very inspiring, also very humble, and it's really likable to see that kind of architecture. Actually, it's not really an architectural question, but I wonder why, when you build this community center, is it only with women and for women, and why it's just only women? Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's true. Because men have a lot of places they can go to. There are, there's shops. They're always everywhere. Women, especially in the camps, do not get a chance to go anywhere. They're very, I would say, conservative Muslim community. So women generally stay in their households. So basically, they're very confined in their tiny little room, basically, and almost just within that community space, within their basic area. So these spaces are important for many reasons. One, they get to come out. They get to also mingle with other women, to be there, to have some space for themselves, and to sort of have a healing process, as I was mentioning, because they go through a huge amount of trauma. There's a lot of gender violence inside the camps. So that's also something that one needs to address. They get counseling sessions. There are midwives in these facilities where women also get these services. They also get skill training, so they can also learn certain kind of skills, and then through that they can also earn some money, which in the refugee camps it's also quite difficult. But there are certain programs by UN which is called the Cash for program, where if they do something, they get some cash, and they need the cash also to buy things. So that's why the women's centers are important places. So there are two kind of centers. One is women-led community centers. So those are basically women-led, but men can also come into those spaces. And there are these women-friendly centers where no men can enter. That's entirely women's domain. And that's basically for adolescent girls and also for women. So both share the space, because the adolescent girls are also very important, as are the adolescent boys, because the boys are really not being, taken into account at all, which is definitely a concern, because they don't have any training. They don't learn any kind of, because there's no school as such. There's no skill training, nothing. So this is, I feel that it's a major missed opportunity not to give them any kind of, sort of training, or any sort of empowering, anything to empower them with. Even if they go back to Myanmar, let's say, they would have to make a living out of something, which they're not paying. So it's really a lost generation in many ways.
Thank you very much again, Marina.
Thank you all for
think-
coming and listening to me.
I think we can wrap it up here. We can continue our discussion behind a drink.
Thank you. Thank you.